Evidence that populations change over time, Part 1. Scientific theories are based on large amounts of evidence gathered through observation and experimentation and are generally accepted by the experts in the field. The phrase, "it's just a theory," is misleading and leads to wrong conclusions. We have already seen some evidence that natural selection occurs and populations change over time. Let's take a look at some other lines of evidence supporting the theory of evolution. The evidence that populations change over time will be presented in 5 areas: fossils, anatomy comparisons, DNA and protein sequence comparisons, animal embryo comparisons, and biogeography. Continuing evolution. Populations continue to evolve over time. As covered earlier, genomes change over time. Antibiotics, pesticides, herbicides, and chemotherapy drugs that resisted diseases, destroyed harmful pests and plants, and worked to alleviate cancer symptoms may lose their functionality. Some of the harmful organisms and molecules that caused those problems mutate to resist the various chemicals and drugs and then multiply, evolving the population. For example, as antibiotics kill disease-causing bacteria, the mutated bacterial cells survive and multiply. The population evolves. A similar process occurs with pathogens. As weaker pathogens are destroyed, there are a few that mutate into stronger organisms that can fight immune systems. If the immune systems can't change, the pathogens will overwhelm them, causing emergent diseases. The immune system molecules then evolve so that they are effective, keeping the cycle of evolution going. Fossils. Fossils are preserved when sedimentary rock forms around the remains of living things. Very old layers of sedimentary rock can be lifted to the surface by plate tectonics, giving us access to old fossils. Fossil dating. Fossils can be dated by several methods. Radiometric dating is performed on the rocks that the fossils are found in. The ratio of a radioactive isotope to its non-radioactive element is mathematically analyzed to find its age. If a fossil is in that particular rock, it is assumed that it has the same age. Distance measurements. If similar fossils are found a great distance away from each other, and the age of fossils in one location is known, it can be assumed that the age of each group of fossils is the same. Law of superposition. In geology, sedimentary rocks are always deposited one layer at a time. The newest layer is always superimposed over the older layer below it. As a layer of sediment petrifies, it entraps various biological organisms, embedding them within the layer. They leave either impressions of soft material or actual artifacts of hard materials, such as shells. A biological fossil record is left. As sedimentary rocks are laid down over each other, if a fossil is lower than another, then it is assumed to be older, being in the older rock layer. This does not give an exact age, but it gives a chronological order. So we can see these layers of sedimentary rock from 2 to 100 to 500 to 570 million years ago. Numerous fossil discoveries allow us to trace the evolution of living species to their extinct ancestors. The deepest layers of rock, as you can see here, are the oldest layers. Fossils tell us about the bodies of extinct species and how species have changed. For many living species, such as the horse, we have very complete fossil records with teeth and bone samples from many time points. You can see in millions of years ago from 55 to 5 and the various bone and teeth fragments as we move through that time. Look at the changes in the forefeet and teeth of the horse over the last 55 million years. They show change over time, evolution, from Hyracotherium to Equus. The stromatolites are the oldest fossils of life on Earth. They are fossilized bacterial colonies and are 3.6 billion years old. The Ediacarian fossil is approximately 550 million years old. It was one of the earliest multicellular animals. This video is about the most completely preserved dinosaur specimen ever found. It is not just a skeleton, it is a whole dinosaur. The Nodosaur lived 110 million years ago. The best fossil evidence for evolution are transitional fossils. Transitional fossils are from extinct species, but they show us the intermediate body plans between old and new types of species. They show a path from ancestors to their descendants. They possess features of both the ancestors and their descendants. Since evolution is the change in populations over time, it is supported by physical evidence of intermediate steps, transitions from old to new. Mahakala is a transitional fossil between dinosaurs and birds. It shows features of both dinosaurs and birds and indicates that birds evolved from dinosaurs. Tiktaalik is a transitional fossil between fish and amphibians. It shows features of both fish and amphibians and indicates that amphibians evolved from fish. Anatomy comparisons. Anatomy is the study of body structures. When we compare the anatomies of different types of organisms, we see similar structures used over and over again. But in each species, the structure may have changed over time and become adapted to carry out different functions. The best explanation is that they evolved from a common ancestor with these characteristics. This is evidence for descent with modification. All the skeletons in this picture are from different species, but they all have skulls, backbones, 4 limbs, and ribs. This is evidence for descent with modification from a common ancestor. Homologous structures are parts of animals that look similar to parts of other animals, even if they perform different functions. They are evidence for a common ancestor. The figure on the next slide shows limb bones of 4 different mammals. They are labeled with the functions that each perform for the identified mammal. So you can see the humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges in a human, a cat, a whale. They're color-coded, right? So these long blue colored appendages are the phalanges in the whale, and then the bat. So you can see humerus, radius, the ulna behind there, carpals, metacarpals in green, and phalanges in blue. So in the human, these bones are used for grabbing, throwing, holding, and fine manipulation. In a cat, for jumping, landing, and running. In a whale, for swimming and changing direction. And in a bat, for flying. Natural selection placed pressure on ancient populations. Not all organisms could get enough to eat, avoid predators, and reproduce in their ecosystems. Variations in limbs that could help swim, fly, walk on land, hold things, or dig in soil were advantageous for the individuals that had them. Over millions of years, the limbs changed and new species emerged as adaptations were selectively passed to offspring. The limbs of all of these organisms turtle, alligator, bird, mammal, including humans, evolved from an ancient lobe-finned fish. The Galapagos finches are evidence for a common ancestor as well, as shown in this tree of life. So we have some ancestral seed-eating finches, which then diverge into tree finches, vegetarian and insectivorous, ground finches, and warbler-like finches, which then you can see deviate even further. The Galapagos finches are also known as Darwin's finches. As finches migrated to different islands over time, geographic isolation occurred, with populations adapting to the environmental conditions of each island. Natural selection occurred when differing food sources on the islands allowed finches better adapted to that food source to survive. The survivors then produced more offspring with that trait. For example, on islands with harder shelled seeds, finches with stronger beaks better able to crack open the seeds were selected for. It then became a dominant trait of finches on that island. Vestigial structures are structures on an organism which have lost function and atrophied or shrunk through time. The body part had a function in an ancestor, but through modifications and evolution, the body part is no longer useful, as seen with the flightless cormorant's wings at the right. So you can see how small they've gotten because they're no longer used for flight. In both the snake and whale, there are vestigial bones, both the femur and the pelvis. The human appendix. What is now the human appendix was once an extra pouch to help digest food back when our ancestors were herbivores and ate mainly plant material. Since then, humans have developed into more of an omnivore, eating both meat and plants, so the pouch lost both its function and its original structure. This would suggest that the human appendix is a vestigial organ. Current research indicates that the appendix still provides a function in storing and supplying helpful bacteria for the digestive system, especially after a person suffers diarrhea. If this is true, then the appendix is not vestigial. However, it can become inflamed due to various reasons. As shown below, you can see the inflammation of the appendix here. If we get some sort of calcified fecal deposit that can become infected and cause this enlargement and inflammation in the appendix. It is surgically removed when that happens.